I think I didn't do anything wrong, just tried to teach him a lesson for being moody on our trip. I left him at the gas station thinking he'd laugh about it later. I didn't know that driving away for a joke would be the last time I saw him as my husband, or that he'd use the law to disappear from my life entirely. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The following days blurred together. Every hour felt like a punishment I didn't understand. I kept telling myself he'd come home once he'd calmed down, that this was just another one of his quiet phases. But the letter from the law firm sat on the counter like a warning sign I didn't know how to read. I tried ignoring it, stacking unopened mail on top of it, but it kept showing up in my mind. That one word, represented. At first, I tried acting normal. I went to work, kept Oliver's routine the same, even posted a photo of our peaceful weekend, just me and my son having pancakes. I captioned it, "Sometimes a little space does good for everyone." People liked it. A few commented hearts. For a moment, I felt like I was controlling the story again. Then one of my co-workers, Dana, came to my desk at the travel agency and said, "Hey, is it true your husband's missing?" I stared at her, confused. "He's not missing," I said. "He's just staying with family." She shrugged and said, "Well, someone online said the police got involved." I laughed it off, but my face burned. I spent my lunch break in the break room, scrolling social media, and there it was. A local community post with a blurry photo of our car at a gas station and the caption, "Wife drives off, leaves husband stranded." The comments were merciless. Who does that? If a man did this, people would lose their minds. Humiliation isn't funny. I wanted to scream that it was all out of context, that I didn't mean to hurt him, but every time I opened the comment box, my hands froze. That night, Hannah called. She sounded uneasy, almost whispering. She said, "Verena, maybe you should just call him. Say sorry, make it simple." I told her he'd blocked me. She said, "Then go see him in person." I said, "He doesn't want to be seen." She sighed. "You made your point. Don't let this grow bigger." I hated her tone, calm, pitying, almost maternal. I snapped, "You're acting like he's the victim here." She said, "Well, you left him on the side of the road." I hung up before she could finish. The next morning, I found a new email from Rachel West's office. It wasn't written by her directly, just an assistant confirming receipt of my attempted messages to Evan. "Mr. Holt has requested no direct contact," it read. "Future communication should be formal." That word, formal, felt like a wall slamming shut. I tried calling Lydia again. She didn't answer, but an hour later, she sent a text. "He's fine. Don't come here. He doesn't want a scene." I typed back, "He's overreacting. Tell him to call me." No reply. Later that afternoon, I went to pick up Oliver from school. One of the teachers asked gently if everything was okay at home. I said, "Of course." She said she'd seen something online. I realized Evan's story had traveled beyond our circle, beyond me. That night, I poured wine and scrolled through old photos of us. We'd been together 10 years. I couldn't understand how he'd erased that over one mistake. I posted again, this time trying to take control. Sometimes people make drama out of nothing. Learn to laugh. It's healthier. I added a selfie, smiling, composed, pretending confidence I didn't feel. Within minutes, the post started getting comments again. Not supportive ones. Someone wrote, "Laughing at your husband's pain?" Yikes. Another said, "You should apologize, not post." Even Adele from work, who usually defended me, messaged privately. "Maybe stay offline for a bit. People are judging hard." I deleted the post after an hour, but the damage was done. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers wanted to know my side. The story was out of my hands now. When I woke up the next morning, there was another email. this time directly from Rachel West. Short, polite, terrifying. Please be advised that Mr. Holt has initiated the process for legal separation. Custody and property discussions to follow. We suggest you seek independent counsel. I read it 3 times before it registered. Separation. Custody. The words didn't sound real. I spent the whole day in denial. I went shopping, bought groceries he used to like, cooked his favorite meal. I told myself that once he heard I'd cooked for him, he'd soften. I even set the table for 3, as if he'd just walk in and sit down. Oliver asked, "Is Daddy coming?" I said, "Maybe." He said, "Grandma told me he's busy." I told him not to believe everything Grandma said. He went to bed early that night, quiet. I sat at the table staring at the untouched plates. The apartment felt wrong, like something had shifted permanently. Around 10, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a link to a private online folder labeled Evidence. Inside were screenshots of my posts, my messages, and even the gas station's security footage. The video showed me pulling away, Evan waving slightly, then putting his hands in his pockets. The angle caught everything, my face, my smirk. I slammed the phone down, my stomach turning. He'd kept it all. He'd turned my joke into a case. I called Hannah, panicking. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail. "He's trying to destroy me. He's collecting things. I think he's serious about the divorce." 10 minutes later, she texted back, "He's not trying to destroy you, Verena. He's protecting himself." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the video in my mind, my car pulling away, his calm stance. I remembered laughing. I'd told myself it was harmless, but watching it now, it looked cruel, like something you couldn't explain away with a caption. The next morning, Lydia showed up at my door. She didn't come in. She just handed me a brown envelope. "He asked me to give you this," she said. Inside were the separation papers, formal, stamped, complete. I asked, "Did he say anything else?" She looked at me for a moment and said, "Just that this is the first thing you've done he's taking seriously." Then she left. I stood there, shaking, the papers trembling in my hands. I thought about running after her, begging her to tell him to talk to me. But pride, that old, poisonous pride, kept me frozen. When Oliver came out of his room, rubbing his eyes, he saw the envelope and asked what it was. I said, "Just adult stuff." He asked if Daddy was coming home soon. I said, "Maybe after a while." He nodded, trusting me completely, and went back to his toys. I sat down on the floor beside him, holding the envelope, realizing that for once, Evan hadn't yelled, hadn't argued, hadn't even explained. He'd just walked away and left the law to do the talking for him. And somehow, that silence hurt more than any fight we'd ever had. For the first few days after that envelope arrived, I kept expecting someone to call and say it was all a misunderstanding, that maybe he'd overreacted and just needed time, that someone, his mother, my sister, even the lawyer, would step in and explain that we were both being dramatic. But no one did. Everyone went quiet in a way that made the silence feel planned. I kept busy pretending life was fine. I went to work, got Oliver ready for school, and answered questions with fake smiles. When co-workers asked where Evan was, I said he was taking a little solo trip. But I could tell they already knew. People had seen the community post, the gas station story that wouldn't die. Even clients at the travel agency whispered. I heard one of them tell another, "She's the woman who left her husband as a prank." They didn't know I could hear, but I did. At lunch, Miles sat beside me in the break room. He spoke softly, like he was afraid to set me off. "You should probably stay off social media for a while," he said. I told him it was blown out of proportion. He shrugged. "Maybe. But perception's reality now." I rolled my eyes and said, "You sound like him." He said, "Maybe he finally rubbed off on someone." I didn't answer. When I got home, the house felt smaller. The quiet had a weight. I checked the front door too often, thinking maybe I'd find a note or a message, or him standing there. Instead, I found a letter from Lydia in the mailbox. No return address, just her handwriting. Inside, one short line. "He's doing this right this time." I read it 3 times before tearing it up. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I decided if everyone was going to talk about me, I'd talk louder. I started typing a long post. People love to twist stories. A marriage is private, not for strangers to judge. Maybe everyone should focus on their own lives. I added a picture of Oliver smiling to soften it. Within an hour, comments rolled in, some supportive, but most harsh. "You humiliated him, and now you want sympathy." If it was a man who left his wife like that, you'd be screaming abuse. Someone even tagged Lydia, who didn't respond but left the tag up. I deleted the post, but screenshots spread. I turned my phone face down and pretended I didn't care. The next morning, my manager called me into her office. She said, "We need to discuss your online activity." My stomach dropped. She explained that my posts had caused distraction and concern. I tried laughing it off. "So I can't even post about my life now?" She said, "You can, but maybe not while representing the company." Her tone was polite, but it was clear. My reputation was making her nervous. I went home early and stared at the separation papers again. They weren't emotional, just lists, bullet points, conditions. There was even a section titled Public Conduct Clause. It warned against statements or posts that may defame or publicly embarrass either party. The wording felt surgical. Evan must have had help writing that. I imagined him sitting with Rachel West, calm and quiet while she guided his pen. I tried calling his old number again. It went straight to voicemail. I left one last message. "Evan, we can fix this. You don't have to make it official. It was one mistake." My voice cracked near the end, but I said it anyway. He didn't call back. Hannah came over later, holding groceries, and that look that said she didn't want to be here. She said she'd seen the posts. "You should stop feeding it," she said. "He's just making sure there's no more damage." I snapped. "He's making me look like a monster." She said quietly, "He doesn't have to. You did that yourself." I told her to leave. She did. After she left, I found myself pacing the living room, thinking about that gas station again, about his face when I drove away. I remembered laughing, shouting out the window, "You'll survive." I hadn't even looked back after that. Now, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that same image. It wasn't funny anymore. It was frozen in my head, like evidence. The next day, a courier dropped off a small box. Inside was a USB drive and a note from Rachel West's office. The note said, "Per request, please retain this copy of submitted materials for transparency." I plugged it into my laptop. Inside were labeled folders, incident footage, social posts, texts. My chest tightened. The gas station footage again, but this time from multiple angles. The station's front camera, the parking lot, even a side feed from a trucker's dash cam. Every view showed me laughing, driving away while he stood there. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't chased, he'd just watched. I pulled the drive out and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, still glowing red. The next morning, Lydia called for the first time since it happened. Her tone was calm, not cruel. She said, "He's fine. He's with us for now." I said, "Then tell him to stop this. I've learned my lesson." She said, "He's not teaching you a lesson, Verena. He's protecting himself." I said, "From what?" She paused for a long time, then said, "From you thinking everything's a joke." After that, she hung up. I sat in the kitchen staring at the half-empty wine glass from the night before. Oliver came in asking if he could call his dad. I told him Daddy was busy. He said, "Grandma said I can talk to him on Sunday." I didn't respond. My eyes burned. That night I dreamt of the gas station. the smell of gasoline, the hum of cars passing. Only this time, in the dream, he didn't just stand there. He turned, looked straight at me and said, "Drive all you want, I'm already gone." When I woke up, my phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Rachel West's office again. Preliminary custody discussion set for next week. Attendance required. Custody. The word made my stomach turn. I'd told myself he wouldn't take it that far. That we'd settle. That he'd cool off. But now I realized the truth. This wasn't about cooling off. This was structure, evidence, intention. I looked around the apartment. The dishes piled up, Oliver's toys on the floor, the silence pressing from every corner. For the first time, it hit me that Evan wasn't trying to make me apologize. He was building a life that no longer needed me. And I couldn't decide what scared me more. Losing him, or realizing he'd already adjusted to life without me. By the time the custody email came, I was unraveling. It wasn't anger anymore, it was disbelief, a quiet panic that hummed under my skin. I kept rereading the message, thinking maybe I misunderstood. Attendance required. The words felt like a summons to my own failure. I spent the next day in a haze, alternating between searching his name online and pacing the apartment. Evan had deleted all his social media. No photos, no posts, nothing. It was as if he'd never existed. Meanwhile, mine was flooded with comments, screenshots, tags. People who didn't even know me had opinions. I kept replying to defend myself, then deleting the replies minutes later. At work, I tried to act normal, but it was impossible. Dana avoided me completely. Miles stopped eating lunch in the same room. Even the clients treated me differently. One woman looked at me over the counter and said, "You're that girl from the Post, aren't you?" I said no, but she smiled like she knew better. I went to the restroom and sat in a stall for 20 minutes, shaking. That evening, Hannah came over again. She said, "I saw the notice online. He's filing for shared custody." I said, "He can't take Oliver from me." She said, "He's not taking him, Verena. He's making sure you can't use him to reach him." I told her she sounded like Lydia. She said, "Maybe Lydia's the only one seeing clearly." That stung more than it should have. I spent that night writing an email to Evan. I told him I was sorry, that I missed him, that Oliver missed him. I said we didn't need lawyers, that we could just talk like adults. I hit send and waited, checking my inbox every few minutes. Hours passed, nothing. The next morning, his reply arrived. 2 sentences. "Please respect the process. All communication must go through legal counsel." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Later that day, I drove to Lydia's house. I didn't call first. When she opened the door, she didn't look surprised. "You shouldn't be here," she said. I said, "You can't stop me from seeing my husband." She said, "He doesn't live here anymore." I asked where he was. She said, "Somewhere you can't find him." I tried to push past her, but she stood firm. "Lydia, this is insane," I said. "You're turning him against me." Her eyes hardened. "No, you did that yourself. You left him standing on a highway like trash. What did you think would happen?" I wanted to scream, but the calmness in her voice made me hesitate. I said, "It was a joke." She said, "Then this is the punchline." I left before I cried in front of her. When I got home, there was another envelope on the counter. This one was from my office, a suspension notice. "Reputational concerns following public incident," it said. I sat on the floor, holding the letter, wondering how quickly a life could collapse. That night, Oliver asked if he could sleep in my bed. I let him. He said, "Mom, did you make Daddy mad?" I said, "No, sweetheart. Daddy's just being silly." He said, "He told Grandma you left him on purpose." I froze. "He said that?" Oliver nodded. "He said it's okay. He forgives you, but he's not coming back." I couldn't breathe. I waited until he fell asleep, then slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. I poured a drink and stared at the separation papers again. My signature was still missing. I thought about ripping them up, but part of me knew that would change nothing. The next morning, another email arrived, this time from Rachel West herself. She asked me to confirm attendance for the mediation. The tone was professional, polite, final. I replied, confirmed, my hands trembling. The days that followed felt mechanical. I tried to act like everything was normal for Oliver, but I was unraveling inside. The neighbors must have sensed it too. They stopped saying hello. When I passed them in the hallway, they just nodded and avoided my eyes. On Thursday, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Rachel. She said, "Mr. Holt asked me to remind you not to contact him directly." I said, "You can tell him he's cruel." She said, "He's careful." Her voice was so calm it made me want to scream. I hung up and threw my phone across the couch. That weekend, Hannah came back again. She said she'd spoken to Lydia. "They're serious about the custody thing," she said. I laughed bitterly. "So he's punishing me through paperwork?" She shook her head. "He's protecting Oliver. You can't keep using him as a shield." That comment stung. I said, "You think I'm a bad mother?" She said, "I think you've been so focused on winning you forgot what losing costs." After she left, I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the wall. I started thinking about the drive that day again. The way Evan had stood there, watching me leave. How quiet he'd looked, almost peaceful. I'd mistaken that calm for weakness, but now I saw it for what it was, resolve. The next morning, a courier arrived with another brown envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a brief letter. Submitted materials for mediation review, it said. I plugged it in, and there it was again. The footage, the gas station from every possible angle. Only this time, the file had captions. Timestamps, notes, even witness statements. "Witness observed husband left intentionally," one line read. I covered my mouth with my hand. The evidence wasn't just proof of what I did, it was proof of intent. That night, I couldn't eat. I lay awake, replaying that video in my mind, over and over. I saw myself smiling, laughing, rolling away while he stood there still. I'd told myself it was harmless, that it was his fault for being so quiet. But in that moment, watching it now, I saw the truth. I hadn't been joking. I'd wanted to hurt him. The next day, Oliver was drawing at the table. He asked, "Mom, when's Dad coming?" I said, "Soon." He looked up at me and said, "You always say soon." I didn't have a response. When he went to bed, I poured another glass of wine and stared at my reflection in the window. The street outside was dark, the kind of dark that swallows sound. I thought about calling Rachel, apologizing, begging for a chance to talk to him privately. But I knew it wouldn't matter. He wasn't waiting for me to change anymore. He was documenting that I hadn't. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't trying to win me back. He was making sure I couldn't reach him again. The morning of the mediation came faster than I expected. I'd spent the week convincing myself it wouldn't really happen, that he'd cancel last minute, that we'd finally sit down and talk like a normal couple instead of through lawyers. But when the day arrived, my stomach turned to ice. The letter said to arrive at Rachel West's office by 10 sharp. I left the apartment an hour early, wearing a dress I thought made me look respectable, calm, even likable. The office was in one of those modern buildings with too much glass. Everything inside was polished and quiet. I stood at the reception desk trying to look confident. Rachel came out a few minutes later. She was taller than I imagined, all composed precision. She greeted me politely, shook my hand and said, "Mr. Holt is already in the conference room." I froze at his name. For months he'd been in absence, a ghost in documents and emails. Seeing him again made everything feel real. When I walked in, he was sitting at the far end of the long table, looking at some papers. He didn't even glance up at first. His hair was shorter, his face leaner. He looked steady, like someone who'd already moved on. I said, "Hi." He said, "Good morning." Nothing more. No anger, no warmth, just civility. Rachel started with small talk about the process, explaining how we'd review the proposed agreements calmly and professionally. Her tone was the same one I used with difficult clients. I hated it. She laid out folders in front of each of us. "We'll go through custody first," she said. I nodded, pretending to understand. My lawyer, who barely spoke to me beforehand, whispered, "Just stay composed." I said, "I am composed," but my hands were shaking under the table. Rachel reviewed everything like it was routine: housing arrangements, school schedules, weekends. Then she mentioned that Evan was requesting primary custodial responsibility. I cut in, saying, "That's ridiculous. He's barely been here for months." She didn't even look surprised. "You've been publicly active on social media, correct?" she said. I frowned. "So what?" She said, "Posting about an ongoing family dispute can raise questions about stability." I wanted to snap at her, but Evan was watching me silently, and that made it worse. He wasn't arguing. He didn't need to. The calm way he sat there made me look defensive before I even opened my mouth. I said, "He's using the internet against me now." Rachel replied, "He's presenting evidence." My lawyer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can focus on reconciliation rather than blame." Rachel nodded politely. "Mr. Holt has made it clear he prefers resolution, not reconciliation." That hit me like a slap. I turned to Evan and said, "You really want to raise our son in courtrooms instead of a home?" He didn't look at me. "I want him in a stable home," he said softly, "one that doesn't turn love into humiliation." For a second I thought I'd cry. Instead, I laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds like a mistake. "You're acting like I'm abusive," I said. He said, "You turn my pain into a performance." Rachel's voice cut in, measured as always. "Let's return to the documents." She handed me a form with neat columns and signatures already waiting. I skimmed through the legal jargon until a sentence caught my eye. Mutual non-disparagement clause. I asked what it meant. Rachel said, "Neither party can speak negatively about the other publicly or privately, where it might reach a third party, including the child." I almost laughed again. "So I can't even tell my sister how unfair this is?" She said, "Not without potential consequences." My lawyer leaned close and whispered, "Just sign, we'll amend later." I felt dizzy. Evan hadn't said a word since that one line. I wanted him to look at me, to show some emotion, even anger, anything. But he stayed still, fingers folded, expression calm. I realized then that I wasn't the one controlling the scene anymore. Rachel asked if we'd like to take a short break. I said no, trying to sound strong. "Let's finish." She nodded and moved on to the finances. Evan had already transferred part of the savings to a joint trust for Oliver. He'd left me my portion, clean, exact, generous enough to sting. There was nothing for me to fight about. When the meeting ended, Rachel stood, thanked us both for our cooperation, and said the final documents would be ready next week. My lawyer shook hands with everyone like it was a routine job. Evan started gathering his papers. I said, "That's it. That's your revenge. Paperwork." He looked at me then, the first real eye contact in months. "No, Verena, it's my piece." He walked out before I could reply. I stayed sitting there, staring at the table. Rachel collected her folders quietly. She said, "You'll receive your copies in 3 business days." Her tone was soft, professional, almost kind. That made it worse. When I left the building, the sunlight felt wrong, too bright for what had just happened. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying not to scream. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger's. Pale, older, desperate. At home, Oliver was drawing at the table again. "Did you see Daddy?" he asked. I said yes. "Did he say when he's coming home?" I said, "He's busy." He nodded, too used to that answer by now. I went to my room and stared at the folder Rachel had given me. The papers were heavy in my hands. It didn't feel real that a few signatures could undo a decade of marriage. I read his signature over and over. His handwriting looked steady, unchanged, neat. I wanted to call him, to beg him to stop, but the more I thought about it, the more I understood he wouldn't. He wasn't angry anymore, and that was worse than rage. It meant he'd already grieved. Later that night, Hannah texted, "How did it go?" I wrote back, "He's calm." "Too calm," she replied. "That's what happens when someone's done being hurt." I didn't respond. I sat there in the dim light, the papers spread across the bed like proof of something final. Around midnight, I checked my email again. There was one new message from Rachel's office. "Please confirm delivery address for finalized decree." Beneath it, a line I hadn't seen before. "Mr. Holt has chosen to relocate permanently. Forwarding details withheld by request." That last sentence made my throat close. He wasn't just leaving me. He was leaving the city. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, realizing that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the one in control. I'd made him feel small for years, and now he'd shown me what small really felt like. Quiet, invisible, unfixable. And all it took was his silence. The final meeting was held a week later, this time at the courthouse. It wasn't a trial, just a formal signing of the finalized agreement. Still, the word court made my stomach twist. I woke early, barely slept, and kept telling myself it was just paper. We could still fix it, still talk after it was done. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. When I arrived, Evan was already there. He stood in the hallway with Rachel West, both looking calm, composed, like people at a business meeting. He wore a dark grey suit, the same one he used to wear to weddings and family dinners. I used to love that suit. Now it made him look like a stranger. He didn't look at me right away. Rachel greeted me politely, saying, "We'll just confirm the details, and then the judge will sign off." Her tone was crisp, rehearsed. I nodded, trying not to show how nervous I was. My lawyer arrived late, smelling like coffee and indifference. He said quietly, "Just keep answers short." Inside the conference room, everything was sterile. Beige walls, wooden table, faint smell of disinfectant. Papers were already laid out in neat stacks. Rachel began going through them again, though I knew every line by heart now. It was like hearing the end of a story I already hated. She reviewed the custody schedule first. Oliver would live with Evan during the week, with me on weekends. Holidays would alternate. I interrupted. "That's not fair. I'm his mother." Rachel didn't even blink. "It's what the evaluation recommended based on stability." I laughed sharply. "Stability? He disappeared for months." Evan spoke for the first time. "You left me on the side of a highway." The room went silent. I wanted to yell that it wasn't the same, that it was a joke, that he was twisting it. But his tone wasn't angry. It was measured, calm. That made it worse. Rachel handed me another paper, financial division. Half the savings, split evenly. I asked why he was giving me so much. "You don't have to do this," I said. He said, "It's not about you anymore." I wanted to scream that it was, that everything still revolved around me, that he couldn't just detach so neatly, but he already had. Rachel kept talking about property rights, vehicle ownership, joint assets. I barely heard her. My mind kept flashing to the image of him walking away from the gas station, that steady stride that now made so much sense. He'd started walking away long before that day. I just never noticed. When she reached the final clause, the non-disparagement one, I interrupted again. "So I can't even tell people my side?" Rachel looked up. "You already did." I wanted to protest, but the truth stung too much. Every post, every comment, every careless laugh. They were my side, and they destroyed me. My lawyer nudged the papers toward me, pen ready. "Sign here, and initial at the bottom." My hand hovered. I looked at Evan and said, You really want to end it like this? He said, I already did. This is just the paperwork. I signed, each stroke feeling like a confession. When it was done, Rachel gathered the papers with quiet precision and said she'd submit them for final approval. The judge would sign within the week. As we stood to leave, I turned to Evan and said, You could have fought for us. He said, You fought enough for both of us. I'm done fighting. Then he left with Rachel, the door closing softly behind them. I sat back down, unable to move. My lawyer said something about the next steps, but I barely heard him. When he left, I stayed there, alone, staring at the empty chair across from me. It still felt warm, like he'd only been gone for seconds, but somehow the air already felt heavier without him. Outside, the hallway was quiet. Lydia stood at the far end, holding Oliver's backpack. When she saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. He didn't want to bring him here, she said. He thought it would be confusing. I nodded numbly. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, He's not doing this to hurt you. He's doing this to protect what's left of him. Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. They just made the silence louder. When I got home, the apartment felt foreign. I noticed the little details, how the light hit the empty side of the closet, the faint dent in the couch where he used to sit. It all felt like a crime scene. I poured a drink and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the signed copy of the agreement. The legal stamp at the top looked cold, final. I kept running my fingers over his signature, half expecting it to smudge. It didn't. It was dry, permanent, perfect. Later that night, I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. Just one unread email from Rachel West's office. I opened it, expecting another document. Instead, it was a scanned note written in Evan's handwriting. Thank you for signing. I hope you find peace the way I finally did. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, staring at those words, the way I finally did. He wasn't angry. He wasn't gloating. He was gone. Hannah called later, but I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying she was sorry, that she'd stopped taking sides. I deleted it. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted control, and I'd lost it completely. Before bed, I went into Oliver's room. His toys were scattered everywhere. On his nightstand was a photo of us from the last family trip we took before everything went wrong. We were smiling, but even then I could see it. The stiffness in Evan's shoulders, the tightness around my own eyes. I picked up the photo and held it until my hand ached. I thought about calling him one last time, but I knew he wouldn't answer. Even if he did, what could I say? That I didn't mean it, that it was a joke. Words had stopped meaning anything to him, and maybe to me too. When I finally went to bed, the apartment was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just hollow. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that he hadn't punished me with anger. He'd punished me with indifference. And it worked. The decree arrived 2 weeks later by certified mail. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The thick envelope, the official seal, the weight of finality. Still, I held it for hours before tearing it open. Inside were the words that ended 10 years of marriage. Signed, stamped, witnessed. No appeal, no space for questions. I read it 3 times, but the words didn't feel real until I reached the last page. Custody. Joint, primary residence with father. Communication, limited to parenting matters only. My name looked small next to his. I stared at our signatures until they blurred together. That afternoon, I packed the last of his things I'd kept in the closet. Shirts he'd left behind, an old watch, a book of ours from our honeymoon. I placed them neatly in a box. For a second, I almost sent it to him. But then I realized he didn't want reminders. He'd built a life that had no room left for me. When Oliver came home, he asked if we were still a family. I said yes, just a different kind. He said, Dad says families can still love each other, even if they don't live together. I nodded, forcing a smile. He looked satisfied with that answer, but I felt something collapse quietly inside me. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and my phone in front of me. I hovered over his contact name. I hadn't deleted him. I told myself I was keeping it for parenting reasons. But really, it was because I couldn't stand the idea of erasing him completely. I typed out a message. I never meant for any of this to happen. Then I deleted it. Instead, I opened the folder Rachel had emailed, the final settlement documents. I scrolled through them one last time. Every paragraph was proof of his quiet precision, his calm determination. He'd never raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. He'd built a wall of facts so solid that emotion couldn't get through. At the end of the file, there was a short line I hadn't noticed before. Property division complete. Account closure initiated. Beneath that, a comment in her formal tone. Client has relocated. No forwarding address provided. Relocated. The word hit harder than I expected. He was gone. Not just from me, but from this place, this city, the routines that had built our life. Gone without a trace except paperwork. Later that week, I saw Lydia outside the grocery store. She almost walked past me before I said her name. She stopped, her expression careful. I asked where he'd gone. She said, "He asked me not to tell you." I said, "You can't just erase me." She said, "He didn't erase you, Verena. You erased yourself. He just filed the paperwork." I couldn't think of a response. She gave me a small nod, the kind people give when they've said everything they needed to. Then she walked away. When I got home, the apartment felt emptier than ever. I opened the curtains and let the evening light spill in. The air smelled faintly of dust and something fading. On the table sat the divorce decree, still unfolded. The final proof that I'd turned a joke into a lifetime consequence. I thought back to that day at the gas station, the glare of the sun on the windshield, his face in the rearview mirror, that stillness. I had mistaken his calm for weakness, but he'd been planning, even then, quietly deciding to remove himself from the place where he wasn't respected. The sound of the refrigerator hum filled the room. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by laughter from neighbors. Life was still going on around me, just not with me. I poured another glass of wine and sat down. My phone buzzed once, an unknown number. The message was short. Documents finalized. Thank you for cooperating. R. West. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. For a moment, I imagined him somewhere far away, maybe near the ocean, calm as always, teaching Oliver how to skip stones. I hoped he'd found peace. I told myself I was glad for him, but the truth was quieter and heavier. I hadn't lost him in one moment. I'd lost him piece by piece, every time I laughed at his silence, every time I turned something serious into a performance. The gas station was only the final act. When the sun went down, I folded the decree neatly and placed it in the drawer where his wedding ring used to be. The space fit it perfectly. Then I turned off the light, sat in the dark for a while, and realized this was what it felt like when the joke finally ends, and no one's laughing anymore. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.